At a dinner party for her boss, my daughter reduced my 35-year nursing career to a humiliating joke about pee and poo. She thought I would cry. Instead, I stood up, kicked her out of my house, and threw her clothes on the curb. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. At the family dinner, my daughter shouted, "My mom smells like pee and poo." Everyone laughed. I stood up in silence, kicked her out of my house, and threw her clothes on the curb. Humiliation has a price. My name is Martha Green, and this is my story. The arrangement, like most bad ideas, had been born from a place of love and loneliness. A year after my husband Charles passed away, the silence in our large 4-bedroom house had become a physical presence. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of grief. The echoes of his laughter were gone, replaced by the solitary ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. My daughter Chloe had suggested it. She and her husband Derek were living in a cramped, overpriced apartment downtown. They were saving for a down payment on a house of their own, a goal that always seemed to be just out of reach. "You're here all alone, Mom," she'd said one Sunday, her voice a smooth, reasonable balm of concern. "And we're just throwing money away on rent. Why don't we move in with you for a year, just until we get on our feet? We can help with the bills, keep you company. It would be perfect for all of us." And in my lonely, grief-stricken state, it had sounded perfect. I had visions of a bustling home, of my grandchildren's laughter filling the empty rooms, of shared meals, and a renewed sense of purpose. I saw it as a life raft, for them and for me. So I had agreed. That was 2 years ago. The year had stretched on indefinitely. The help with the bills never materialized. The company was a price far too high to pay. The arrangement had become a slow, creeping occupation. I, the homeowner, was being systematically relegated to the role of an unpaid and increasingly invisible staff member. Before I was a mother, before I was a widow, I was a palliative care nurse. For 35 years, my life was spent in the quiet, sacred spaces of the dying, a world where dignity was the final, most precious currency. Now, at 60, I was a widow in a house that no longer felt like my own, serving a daughter who had forgotten the meaning of the word. The disrespect was 1,000 small cuts. It started with small things. Chloe would leave her coffee mug on the antique cherrywood table in the living room, the one my husband had lovingly refinished himself. "Honey, could you use a coaster?" I'd ask, holding one out. She would sigh, a long, theatrical put-upon sound. "Mom, it's just a table. Don't be so precious." Derek began to borrow my car for his meetings. He never asked. He just took the keys from the hook by the door as if it were his own. He'd return it late at night, the gas tank on empty, the interior littered with fast food wrappers. Then came the children. My grandchildren, whom I adored, were slowly being taught that I was not their grandmother, but their servant. "Go ask Nana to get you a snack," Chloe would say, her eyes glued to her phone. "Nana will clean it up," Derek would reassure them when they spilled juice on the rug. I told myself it was for the family. I told myself I was keeping the peace. I told myself it was better than being alone. But with every condescending sigh, with every empty gas tank, with every mess I was left to clean, a small cold knot of resentment was beginning to form in my chest. The announcement came on a Monday evening. Chloe walked into the kitchen where I was preparing dinner, a triumphant, self-satisfied smile on her face. She was waving her phone like a trophy. "Big news, Mom," she said. "I've been given the new Sterling account at work. It's a huge deal. And my boss, Mr. Albright, and his wife are coming for dinner on Saturday. Derek's new potential business partner is coming too. So we need to be on our A game." She paused, her smile tightening. "Everything has to be perfect." I understood immediately. This was not a casual family dinner. This was a performance. a high-stakes professional showcase designed to project an image of effortless, upscale success. The stage for this performance was to be my home. And I, it was clear, was to be the unpaid, uncredited stage manager. For the next 5 days, my quiet, peaceful home was transformed into a high-stress production office. Chloe was a whirlwind of anxious, controlling energy, a director on the verge of a nervous breakdown. "What are you planning for the menu?" she asked, not looking up from her laptop. "I thought a beautiful roast chicken," I began, "with my rosemary potatoes and—" She cut me off with a sharp wave of her hand. "No, Mom, not roast chicken. It's so basic. I'll email you a recipe for a sea bass with a fennel puree. It's what they serve at that new restaurant downtown. Very chic." The next day, it was the table settings. "Are these our only wine glasses?" she asked, holding one of my crystal glasses to the light. "They're so thick. We need something more delicate. And for God's sake, we can't use your old floral china. It's so dated. I'll rent some simple white plates." She rearranged my living room furniture, moving the comfortable, well-loved pieces I had shared with my husband. My hand-knitted afghan was folded and hidden away. The family photos on the mantelpiece, photos of her as a child of Charles, were replaced with a single abstract art print she had borrowed from a friend. Through it all, I said nothing. I simply did as I was told. I shopped for the exotic, expensive ingredients for her chic menu. I polished the silver. I washed and ironed the rented linen napkins. I was a ghost in my own home, a silent pair of hands working to construct a reality that was not my own. Derek, for his part, was her enthusiastic co-conspirator. He saw this dinner as his own big chance to impress his potential partner. "This is it, babe," I heard him say to Chloe one night when they thought I was out of earshot. "If we land this, we'll finally be out of here. No more living under your mom's roof." The casual cruelty of his words was a physical blow. They were not just using my home as a stage. They were actively, eagerly planning their escape from it, and from me. The pressure mounted. The word perfect became Chloe's mantra, a weapon she used to criticize every effort. "The flowers aren't right, Mom. The sauce needs to be smoother. The house needs to be perfect." By Saturday morning, I was exhausted. I'd been cooking and cleaning for 12 hours a day, a silent, unpaid servant in the service of my daughter's ambition. On the afternoon of the dinner party, my sister Denise stopped by. Denise was my polar opposite, loud, opinionated, and with a tongue as sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. She was a high school principal, a woman who had spent a lifetime dealing with entitled teenagers. She had no time for nonsense. She walked into my kitchen to a scene of controlled chaos. I was at the stove, my face flushed, trying to reduce a complex sauce. Chloe was at the island, arranging flowers in a minimalist vase. "Hey, Marty," Denise boomed, kissing my cheek. Her sharp eyes took in everything, my exhausted face, the mountain of dirty pots, and Chloe's serene focus on the flowers. "Wow, looks like you've got the whole catering staff here." "Denise," Chloe said, not looking up. "I'm trying to concentrate." "What can I do to help, sis?" Denise asked me, her voice low. "You look like you're about to drop." Before I could answer, Chloe let out a sharp sigh. "Mom, did you get the Chilean sea bass like I asked? Or did you get the regular sea bass? Because the Chilean has a much higher fat content. It's what the recipe called for." "I got the Chilean," I said, my voice tight. "It cost a fortune, but I got it." "Good," Chloe said. "I don't want anything to go wrong tonight." Denise stared at her niece. She waited until Chloe swept out of the room, then turned to me, her voice a low, furious growl. "Are you going to let her talk to you like that? In your own kitchen? Criticizing the food you are cooking for her fancy friends?" She's just stressed, Denise, I said, the familiar tired excuse. Denise snorted. Stressed? That's not stress, Marty. That's entitlement. That's a 35-year-old woman treating her own mother like a hired hand. You're a saint. She picked up a dish towel. But you know what happens to saints, don't you? She said, her voice low. They get martyred. As the guests began to arrive, a strange transformation occurred. Chloe and Derek, who had been a whirlwind of anxious, demanding energy, suddenly became the very picture of relaxed, gracious hosts. They stood by the door, smiles bright, voices a smooth, charming murmur. They were actors taking the stage, and their performance was flawless. The guests were, as Chloe had promised, an impressive bunch. There was her boss, Mr. Albright, a powerful silver-haired man, and his elegant wife. There was Derek's potential business partner, a slick man who introduced himself as a venture catalyst. I, who had cooked the entire multi-course meal, was not part of the welcoming committee. I was in the kitchen, frantically plating the delicate, complicated canapés Chloe had insisted upon. When the first platter was ready, I smoothed my simple black apron, took a deep breath, and walked into the living room. Chloe saw me enter and gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent command from the director to a member of the crew. "Oh, the appetizers are here," she announced to the room, her voice bright. She did not introduce me. She did not say, "My mother, who is a wonderful cook, has prepared these for us." She said, "The appetizers are here," as if they had materialized by magic. I moved through the room, a silent, smiling specter, offering the platter. The guests took the small bites, murmuring their thanks, their eyes sliding over me without a flicker of recognition. I was not a person. I was a function. I was the hand that delivered the food. For the next hour, that was my role. I shuttled between the hot, chaotic kitchen and the cool, elegant dining room. I refilled wine glasses. I cleared away empty plates. I brought out the main course, the perfectly cooked Chilean sea bass, and served it to each guest. Through it all, my daughter and her husband never once acknowledged my existence, except to give me a subtle gesture or a whispered command. "Dad's glass is empty," Chloe would murmur as I passed. "We need more bread on the table," Derek would signal with a flick of his eyes. They were so skilled at it, so practiced in the art of making me invisible. To their guests, I was simply the help, a hired caterer who was assisting with the party. The thought was so profoundly, deeply humiliating that I had to retreat to the kitchen for a moment and grip the edge of the sink, my knuckles white, just to keep my composure. I was a ghost in my own home, a silent, unpaid servant at a party I had single-handedly catered. The humiliation was a slow-burning fire in my gut. I was rapidly approaching my breaking point. I was in the doorway, about to bring out the platter of roasted Brussels sprouts, when a voice, warm and respectful, cut through the haze. "Excuse me, you're Mrs. Green, aren't you?" I turned. One of the guests, a kind-faced man in his late 50s, was standing up from his seat and walking toward me. I recognized him as a colleague of Chloe's boss. He extended his hand. "I'm David Chun. I work with Bill Albright. But I know you from somewhere else, too. You were my father's nurse 5 years ago at the hospice wing of St. James." The memory came flooding back. His father, a quiet, dignified man. I had been his primary care nurse for the last 2 weeks of his life. "I remember your father," I said, my voice softening. "He was a lovely man. He told me all about his collection of first edition poetry books." David's eyes welled with grateful tears. "He loved his books," he said, his voice thick. "And he loved you. You were so, so good to him. I've never forgotten the kindness and the dignity you showed him, the way you spoke to him, the care you took. You were an angel to us. I wanted to thank you." His words were like a sudden, brilliant ray of sunshine. For a brief, beautiful moment, I was not the invisible help. I was Martha Green, RN, a woman whose life had had purpose and meaning. The conversation at the table had faltered. The guests were all watching. Chloe's boss, Mr. Albright, was smiling, a look of genuine respect on his face. The spotlight, for the first time all night, had shifted. It was no longer on Chloe, the perfect hostess. It was on me, the quiet woman in the apron. The humiliation I had been feeling began to recede, replaced by a flicker of my old quiet pride. Chloe, who had been holding court at the head of the table, was not pleased. The spotlight was no longer on her. The conversation, which she had so carefully curated, had been hijacked by a sentimental story about her mother's old, irrelevant job. I saw the flash of annoyance in her eyes. She was a performer whose scene had just been stolen by a background actor. She needed to reclaim the focus. I turned to go back to the kitchen, my heart warmed by David's kind words. Just then, Derek's potential business partner, a loud, oafish man, wrinkled his nose theatrically. The Brussels sprouts I was holding had a strong, distinct aroma. "Whoa," the man said with a boorish laugh. "What's that smell? Smells like a hospital in here." It was a stupid, thoughtless comment, but it was the opening Chloe had been waiting for. It was her chance to turn the conversation about my nursing career, the very topic that had just earned me respect, into a punchline. She seized it. She threw her head back and let out a loud, high, theatrical laugh, a sound designed to draw every eye in the room back to her. "Oh, don't worry, Mark," she said, her voice ringing with a false, bright cheerfulness. "That's just my mom." She looked down the table, her eyes finding mine, a small, cruel, triumphant smile on her lips. She wanted me to hear this. She wanted me to feel the full, public force of this blow. After 35 years as a palliative care nurse, she announced to the entire table, her voice a declaration of my shame. She always smells a little like pee and poo. The words landed in the center of the dining room like a grenade. Pee and poo. The two words that represent the final, most profound loss of dignity. She had taken my life's work, the sacred, difficult, honorable task of caring for the dying, the very thing David Chun had just praised me for, and reduced it to the basest, most humiliating bodily functions. She had insulted me. She had insulted every patient I had ever cared for. She had desecrated the very core of my identity. And she had done it as a joke, to impress her boss, to put her mother back in her place. For a heart-stopping second, a profound, shocked silence fell over the room. Then, the first sound. It was Derek. He let out a loud, braying laugh, slapping the table. "Good one, babe." Mark, the business partner, joined in. A wave of shocked, awkward, deeply uncomfortable laughter rippled through some of the other guests. On the other side of the table, the reaction was starkly different. My sister Denise stared at her niece, her face a mask of pure, murderous fury. David Chun looked utterly horrified, his face pale with disgust. But the most important reaction was mine. I did not cry. I did not gasp. All the emotion that had been churning inside me, the grief, the resentment, the slow-burning anger, vanished. It was all burned away, cauterized by the white-hot heat of Chloe's insult, leaving behind a profound, terrifying, and utterly silent calm. It was the calm of a woman who had been pushed and pushed and pushed, and had finally, irrevocably, reached her absolute limit. I just stood in the doorway, the platter of Brussels sprouts still in my hand, and I looked at my daughter. My face was utterly blank. The person I had been for 60 years, the patient mother, the accommodating host, the keeper of the peace, died in that doorway. Slowly, with a strange, deliberate grace, I turned and walked to the antique mahogany sideboard. I placed the heavy silver platter down. The sound of the silver meeting the wood was a soft, definitive thud in the silent room. My hands were perfectly steady. I straightened up and turned back to face the room. I did not look at the laughing guests. I did not look at my horrified sister. I looked only at my daughter, Chloe, who was still sitting at the head of the table, a small, triumphant, clueless smile on her face. I walked from the sideboard to the dining room table. My steps were unhurried. My gaze never left her face. I stopped directly behind her chair. She had to crane her neck to look up at me. My voice, when I spoke, was not the warm, gentle tone of a mother. It was a voice I had never heard myself use before. It was not loud, but it was so cold, so clear, and so devoid of emotion that it seemed to cut through all other sound in the room, to suck the very warmth from the air. "Chloe," I said. It was not a question. It was a summons. "Get out." The two words were simple, quiet, and utterly, devastatingly absolute. Chloe's triumphant smile faltered, replaced by a look of stunned, incredulous disbelief. She let out a small, nervous laugh. "What? Mom, what are you talking about? Stop being so dramatic. It was just a joke." "It was not a joke," I said, my voice a flat, calm, terrifying monotone. "And I am not your mother, not any more. I am the owner of this house, and you are no longer welcome in it. Get out." My words finally began to penetrate her bubble of arrogance. A flicker of real fear, of dawning, horrified understanding appeared in her eyes. This was not a game. This was a reckoning. "You can't be serious," she stammered, her voice a high, reedy whisper. "This is insane. We live here." "Not anymore," I said. I did not wait for her to argue. I reached down and placed my hand on the back of her chair. With the calm, steady strength I didn't know I possessed, I pulled the chair back from the table. The legs scraped loudly on the hardwood floor, a harsh, ugly sound. "Get up, Chloe," I said, my voice still a low, dangerous command. She scrambled to her feet, her face pale with shock. She was no longer the sophisticated hostess. She was a stunned, disobedient child. "You too, Derek," I said, my gaze shifting to my son-in-law, who was sitting frozen, his face a mask of slack-jawed disbelief. He looked from me to his wife, his mind clearly unable to process the sudden implosion of his comfortable, freeloading life. "Your children can stay the night. My sister will look after them, but the two of you need to leave. Now." "You can't do this!" Chloe was hysterical now, her voice a shrill, ugly shriek. "This is our home. All our things are here." The time for words was over. I simply walked to her, took her firmly by the upper arm, and began to physically usher her out of the dining room. My grip was surprisingly strong. It was the grip of a nurse who has had to manage difficult patients. She stumbled after me, sputtering, protesting, threatening. "I'll call the police. I'll tell them you've lost your mind. You'll be sorry." Derek finally jolted into action, following us. "Martha, wait. Let's just calm down and talk about this." I ignored them both. I marched Chloe through the living room, past her horrified, silent guests, and to the front door. I unlocked the deadbolt, pulled the door open, and propelled her out onto the front porch, into the cool, dark night. I then turned to Derek, who was hovering in the entryway, and simply pointed. He scurried out after his wife. I was about to close the door, but I looked at her face, contorted with a rage that was entirely focused on her own inconvenience, and not at all on the monstrous cruelty of what she had said. I knew that simply evicting them was not enough. She had publicly humiliated me. Her punishment needed to be equally public. With a calm that was terrifying even to myself, I looked my daughter in the eye. "You are right," I said. "Your things are in my house. Let me get some for you. I closed and locked the door, leaving them stunned on the porch. I did not go to the hall closet for their coats. I turned and walked with a slow, deliberate, thunderous purpose up the main staircase. I walked into the master bedroom, my bedroom, the room they had so casually taken over. I went to the beautiful antique armoire where she kept her most prized possessions. Her designer clothes, the handbags, the shoes that were the armor for her image-obsessed life. I opened the doors. I simply reached in, and with a surge of pure, primal strength, I began to pull them out, armful after armful. Silks, cashmere, designer labels. I gathered a huge, chaotic bundle in my arms. I marched back down the stairs, the luxurious fabrics trailing behind me like a fallen banner. I walked to the front door, unlocked it, and threw it open. Chloe and Derek were still on the porch, in the middle of a frantic, whispered argument. They stopped and stared. I did not say a word. I simply walked past them, down the porch steps, and onto my perfectly manicured front lawn. And there, on the curb, under the cold, unforgiving glare of the street lamp, I threw the clothes. The bundle of silks and cashmere, of status and pretense, landed in a messy, pathetic heap on the damp grass. There, I said, my voice a clear, ringing declaration. You wanted your things. There they are. I turned back to my daughter, whose face was a mask of pure, uncomprehending horror. Humiliation, I said, the words a final, cold, and deeply satisfying verdict, has a price. With that, I turned, walked back into my house, and slammed the door, leaving them outside with the wreckage of their lives. The moment the deadbolt slid home with a solid, final thud, the cold, hard fury that had fueled my actions vanished. My knees felt weak. I leaned my back against the solid wood of the door, my body trembling, my breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. The storm had passed, and I was left standing in the wreckage. The house, which had been so full of noise and tension, was eerily silent. From outside, I could hear Chloe's hysterical, shrieking sobs, a sound of pure, impotent rage. It was a sound I knew I would never forget. The dinner party. I realized with a jolt that I had completely forgotten about my guests. I turned from the door, my movements stiff and robotic, and walked back toward the dining room. The scene was one of utter, awkward chaos. The guests, who had been the unwilling audience to the complete and total implosion of a family, were in the process of making hasty, embarrassed exits. They were gathering their coats and purses, their faces a mixture of shock, pity, and a desperate desire to be anywhere else. "So sorry, Martha," Mr. Albright murmured, not looking me in the eye. "A wonderful meal. We should be going." They were all desperate to flee the scene of the crime. I just nodded, unable to speak, and let them go. Soon only two people remained, my sister Denise and the man who had inadvertently started it all, David Chun. They were standing by the fireplace, their faces a mask of shared horror and concern. Denise came to me first. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just wrapped her strong, solid arms around me in a fierce, protective hug. I collapsed against her, my own sobs finally breaking free. I cried for my daughter, for the terrible, ugly thing I had just done, and for the profound, terrifying relief I felt in having done it. "It's about damn time," Denise murmured into my hair, her voice a low, vicious growl of pure sisterly validation. "It's about damn time you stood up for yourself, Marty." David Chun approached us hesitantly, his kind face full of concern. "Mrs. Green," he said, "I am so sorry. I had no idea my comment would lead to this. What she said was unforgivable." "It wasn't your fault, David," I said, my voice muffled. "This has been coming for a very long time. You just happened to be there when the dam finally broke." Suddenly, a new sound cut through the night. Loud, frantic banging on the front door. "Mom, open this door! You're crazy! We're calling the police!" It was Chloe's voice, raw and furious. Denise's arms tightened around me. "Don't you move," she growled. "Let her." The banging continued, louder this time. "This is our house. You can't just throw us out. I'm calling them, Mom. I mean it." "She's right, you know." Derek's panicked voice joined in. "Martha, this is illegal. You have to let us in." I pulled away from Denise, my tears stopping. The cold calm was returning. "They're right," I whispered. "Can I do this?" "It's your name on the deed, Marty," Denise said, her principal voice emerging. "They are tenants at will. You gave them a verbal notice to vacate, a very loud verbal notice." She steered me toward the kitchen, away from the door. "They can call whoever they want. You are not answering that door." The banging went on for another 10 minutes, punctuated by screams and threats. Then, silence. A car door slammed. Tires squealed on the pavement. Denise and I looked at each other. "They're gone," I said. "For now," she replied, "but this isn't over." We stood in the wrecked dining room, surrounded by the debris of the perfect dinner. The storm was over, but I could hear, faint in the distance, the sound of an approaching siren. The blue and red lights washed over my living room walls, casting a sickening, strobing glare on the half-eaten plates of sea bass. Denise and I stood by the window, watching as 2 police officers walked up the path. Behind them, pulling up in their borrowed car, were Chloe and Derek. I opened the door before they could knock. Chloe, her face blotchy and stained with mascara, rushed forward. "Officer, thank God. My mother. She's having some kind of breakdown. She's unstable. She threw us out. All our things. She threw them in the street. Tell them, Derek." Derek, looking pale and terrified, nodded. "She's not well. We're worried about her." The older officer, a woman with tired, intelligent eyes, looked past Chloe's performance and at me. I was still in my black apron, my face no doubt a wreck. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Riley. Can you tell us what's going on here?" "I am Martha Green," I said, my voice clear and steady, surprising myself. "I am the sole owner of this property. These are my daughter and son-in-law. They have been living here as my guests. Tonight, after a disagreement, I asked them to leave." "She threw us out!" Chloe shrieked. "She's crazy! Look at her!" "Chloe," the officer said, her voice sharp, "let her speak." She turned back to me. "Did you physically assault them?" "No, officer. I escorted my daughter from my dining room to my front porch. She refused to leave. I retrieved some of her belongings for her. She threw my designer clothes on the curb." Officer Riley's gaze drifted to the pathetic, damp pile of clothes on the curb. She looked back at Chloe, who was dressed in an expensive silk dress, and then at me, in my simple apron. "Ma'am," she said to Chloe, "is your name on the lease?" There's no lease," Chloe stammered. "We're family." "Is your name on the deed to this house?" "No, but do you pay rent? Do you have utility bills in your name at this address?" A terrible dawning silence. Chloe's face went from furious to pale. She had no answer. The officer sighed. "Then you are guests, and the homeowner has asked you to leave. It's a civil matter. You need to collect your things and go." But where are we supposed to go?" Derek whimpered. "It's the middle of the night." "That," Officer Riley said, "is not a police matter. Ma'am," she said to me, "I recommend you initiate a formal eviction process tomorrow to have them remove their property. But for tonight, they are not allowed back in this house if you do not want them here." "I do not," I said. The victory was absolute. Chloe stared at me, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. This was a public defeat she could never spin. The police officers, her boss, her sister-in-law's guest. Everyone had seen her for exactly what she was. She and Derek gathered the sad, damp pile of clothes from the curb and drove away. The next day was a tense, bitter, and almost completely silent transition. At precisely 9 a.m., a large yellow moving truck rumbled down my quiet street. Chloe and Derek arrived in a taxi. I had, in a final act of cold, procedural necessity, left a single spare key under the doormat. My text message to her had been simple. You have until 5 p.m. to remove your belongings. Leave the key on the counter. I did not help them. I retreated to the kitchen, made a pot of strong black coffee, and sat at the breakfast nook. My sister Denise arrived at 10 with a box of fresh pastries. She didn't say a word about the moving truck. She just poured herself a cup of coffee and sat with me, a silent, solid pillar of support. We sat for hours, listening to the sounds of their departure. The angry scrape of furniture, the sharp screech of packing tape, the low, furious murmur of their voices. At one point, Chloe appeared in the kitchen doorway. We have food in there, she said, her voice a flat, accusatory monotone. Are you going to pack it for us? Before I could even respond, Denise stood up. No, Chloe, she said, her voice as cold as ice. Your mother is not going to pack your artisanal cheeses and your gluten-free bread for you. You have boxes. You have hands. You are a grown woman. Pack your own damn food. Chloe stared at her aunt, then turned on her heel and stormed away. By late afternoon, the sound subsided. The heavy rolling door of the moving truck slammed shut with a deafening final boom. A few minutes later, I heard the click of the spare key being placed on the kitchen counter, the sound of the front door closing, and then silence. A deep, profound, and utterly beautiful silence. The occupation had ended. The house was finally, completely mine again. A week later, I was starting to breathe again. I was starting to reclaim my space. And that's when a thick, certified envelope arrived in the mail. It wasn't from Chloe. It was from a law firm. My hands trembled as I opened the letter. The cold, formal language hit me like a slap. Cease and desist. Notice to preserve evidence. Unlawful eviction. Intent to litigate. Chloe wasn't just angry. She was suing me. The letter claimed I had entered into a verbal contract promising them housing in exchange for domestic support and companionship. It alleged I had maliciously and violently removed her from the premises, causing extreme emotional distress and professional damages. She was demanding $50,000 and threatening to file a motion to partition the house, claiming her improvements and financial support entitled her to a share of the equity. It was all lies. Every word. But it was terrifying. This wasn't about a family argument anymore. This was war. My first call was to Denise. She was furious. The nerve. The absolute unmitigated gall. My second call was to David Chun. I felt ashamed, but I was desperate. David, I am so sorry to bother you. You were a guest in my home, and I need a lawyer. He was incredible. He wasn't just kind. He was efficient. Don't apologize, Martha. I've already spoken to Bill Albright. Chloe's performance that night did not go unnoticed. Her services are no longer required at the firm. She had been fired. The dinner party she had destroyed her family for had cost her the very job she was trying to impress. David gave me the name of a lawyer, a shark, who specialized in property and family disputes. I met with her the next day. She was all business. A verbal contract is hard to prove. The lawyer, Ms. Diaz, said, but a she-said case is messy. They'll try to paint you as a vindictive, unstable widow. We need proof. We need to show they were freeloaders, not partners. Do you have anything? I thought back over the last 2 years. The unpaid bills, the empty gas tanks. It was all a lack of evidence. How do you prove something that didn't happen? They paid for nothing? Miss Diaz asked. Nothing. In fact, Derek was always launching new ventures. Failed ventures cost money, Ms. Diaz said, her eyes sharp. Where did he get it? That night, I went on a mission. I started with the guest room, which Derek had used as his home office. They had taken the computer, but in their haste, they had left a box of old papers and notebooks in the back of the closet. I found it. A black spiral-bound notebook. It wasn't just a business plan. It was a diary of his entitlement. June 10th. Chloe says Mom's savings are significant. Need to find a way to get her to invest in the new app. August 27. Martha's car is a joke, but it's free. Need to pitch Mark? If we can get out of this hell house and use the equity, we'd be set. October 1st. The old lady is getting on my nerves. Just a few more months. Chloe needs to push harder on the house equity conversation. It's the least she owes us for taking care of her. It was all there. A detailed, written record of their plan to leverage my grief, my home, and my love against me. They didn't just want a free ride. They wanted to take the car itself. I sat on the floor of the empty room, the notebook in my lap, and I felt a cold, hard resolve settle over me. A few days later, the second envelope arrived. This one was from Chloe, thick and hand-addressed. For a fleeting, hopeful moment, I thought it might be an apology. It was not. It was 10 pages long, a rambling, bitter, self-pitying tirade. In her version of events, she was the victim. I was the cruel, unstable, vindictive villain. She accused me of being jealous of her success. She accused me of deliberately sabotaging her career. The pee and poo insult, the grenade that had started it all, was dismissed in a single sentence as a light-hearted comment that your oversensitive nature blew out of all proportion. There was not a single word of apology, not a flicker of remorse. I picked up the phone and called Miss Diaz. I have the rest of the evidence, I said. I have his plan, and I have her confession. The legal threat evaporated with comical speed. Ms. Diaz sent one letter back. It included a scanned page from Derek's notebook and a copy of Chloe's own 10-page victim statement. The letter concluded, any further attempts to litigate this matter will be met with a countersuit for fraud and elder exploitation, utilizing the enclosed documents as Exhibit A and Exhibit B. We are confident a jury will be fascinated by your client's definition of family. We never heard from their lawyer again. In the weeks that followed, I began the slow, methodical, and deeply satisfying process of reclaiming my space. The house, though empty, still held the psychic residue of their disrespect. I needed to scrub it clean. I started with my old room, the master bedroom. It felt alien, a hotel room occupied by careless, unhappy strangers. I threw open the windows, letting the clean, cold wind chase away the last vestiges of her perfume and his cologne. I bundled the expensive, high-thread count sheets Chloe had insisted on buying, and I had paid for, into a black garbage bag. I did not wash them. I took them directly to the outside trash bin. It was a deeply gratifying act of purification. I spent the next 2 days engaged in a frenzy of deep cleaning. I washed the walls. I shampooed the carpets. I was performing an exorcism, washing away the memory of their entitlement one scrub at a time. When the rooms were physically clean, I reclaimed them aesthetically. I repainted the master bedroom, covering the cool, impersonal gray Chloe had chosen with a bright, warm, and joyful shade of sunny yellow. I moved my own furniture back in, the familiar, well-loved pieces that had been relegated to the basement. I put my own pictures back on the walls, photos of Charles, of my parents, of a much younger, happier Chloe. I was restoring my own history to the walls of my life. With every change, the house began to feel like mine again. It began to breathe. The tense, anxious energy was replaced by a quiet, profound sense of peace. My home was no longer a hotel, no longer a stage. It was my sanctuary once more. The silence that I had once feared, the silence that drove me to make the foolish decision to let them move in, was now my most cherished companion. It was the sound of my own thoughts. The price of this peace was high. My grandchildren, the innocent casualties of this war, were the part that ached. After a few tense weeks, a new court-mediated arrangement was made. I see them every other weekend. Our time is quieter now, more focused. I'm not their default babysitter. I am their grandmother. We bake cookies. We work in the garden. I am teaching them, in my own quiet way, the lessons of respect and kindness their parents so spectacularly failed to learn. One cold evening, I sat in my living room, the room that was finally and completely my own. I'd been planning to light a fire. I looked at the 10-page letter from Chloe, which I had kept. The rambling, bitter, self-serving lies. I crumpled the 10 pages into a tight ball. I placed it on the grate, surrounded by kindling. I struck a match. I touched the flame to the edge of the paper. The angry black words curled and turned to ash. I sat in my armchair and watched it burn, a strange, profound sense of peace settling over me. I was not burning a bridge. I was simply clearing away the wreckage. I thought of the phrase that had echoed in my mind on that terrible night. Humiliation has a price. The price had been astronomical. I may have lost my daughter, perhaps forever. But as I sat there in my quiet, clean, and peaceful living room, I realized a deeper truth. The price of my own dignity, I now knew, was a bill I was no longer willing to pay. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you are here.